Just voice.
Yeah, I wanted to say.
Even though it's a bit groggy or this morning after a long day. You are all welcome to this event. This event is a public presentation of a report, an outcome of a research that was conducted here in Nigeria. And the report, as many of you are no doubt aware, is titled WhatsApp and Nigeria's 2019 Elections, Mobilizing the People, Protecting the Vote. It's my pleasure, and indeed I consider it a great honor to be invited to chair today's event. We have a sort of program that has been circulated. We have three presenters today. Mine is just to make an opening remark, a very brief opening remark at that. We all know how significant social media has become and how impactful it has also become on politics, on elections, virtually on all aspects of the political economy of countries such as ours. And WhatsApp in particular has been a major messaging application and platform which has also been very, very impactful. The presenters today are part of a team of researchers who have studied, researched and studied the role of WhatsApp with regards to Nigeria's 2019 elections. It's a very rich report, and I wouldn't want to preempt it, but I think we will all listen to their presentation of that report. And without wasting too much time, I will call on the first presenter, that is Hidayat Hassan, the director of CBD, to make a presentation on fake news and Nigerian politics.
Basically, I'm going to be speaking about the fake news ecosystem in the just concluded 2019 elections, some work we have done at CBD to create a basis for my colleagues to zero down on the use of WhatsApp in the elections itself. Like we are all aware of, the 2019 elections, they are quite important for a host of reasons. It's the 6th consecutive elections in the history of the country, and it also coincides with the period of 20 years of uninterrupted democracy in Nigeria. It's an election of many firsts, because that was the first election in the history of Nigeria that we have we had 91 political parties, over 84 million registered voters, with more than half of them also being young people. The first elections after Professor Jega left, and the first general elections to be conducted by Professor Mahmoud Yakub, general elections at the end of Afia itself. So it's and even the first elections with 73 presidential candidates, we've never had that in the history of the country, in the history of the country. But importantly, it was a straight battle between two candidates, President Muhammadu Buhari and of the All Progressive Congress, APC, and former Vice President Atiku Abubakar of the People's Democratic Party itself. And this election even brought in another lexicon, another word to our political lexicon in Nigeria, third party. The third, how do we call it, the third force. Because we had other formidable candidates like Obieze Kwesi, Mogadu, or Modiebe Showore. So it was quite interesting in itself, even though it was a straight horse race. It was not like there were no issues to discuss about in the elections. The issue of security, anti-corruption, economy, they were all relevant issues. But we should also take into cognizance that that will not be the first time these two political gladiators will be meeting. They met first during the 2007 elections, with Buhari being ahead of Atiku Abubakar, then flying under ANPP and AC in 2007, and they were both aspirants. In fact, they both vied for the tickets under the APC Congress in the APC Congress in 2014, with with Buhari emerging as the APC flag bearers. But it was also supposed to be a positive elections in the sense that you have two Fulanis, you have Muslims, so ethnicity and religion should not actually be an issue in these elections. But of course, like I used to say in the prelude to the elections, that it's beyond these issues and where the votes really are, but it's also basically dependent on how much of the party is able to deploy as much disinformation as possible in these elections. And disinformation is nothing new in Nigerian elections. Either you want to trace it historically or you want to start situating it from the 2015 elections. In 2015, we had like a 55-minute long video tagged the real Buhari, which of course peddled more than fake news. It was filled with untruths about the person of Buhari. We had the Lion of Bodilion. We had lots of documentaries oscillating between 1 hour, 25 minutes and 55 minutes in the 2015 elections. In 2017 also, we saw the instrumentalization of fake news with the monkeypox scare also being utilized to almost quarter the 2017 Anambra governorship elections, where people actually ran to pick their children from schools, and some even withdrew their children. It was not just in Anambra, it affected the southeast and some parts of the south of the country. So, but this phenomenon was actually taken to a higher height in the prelude to the 2019 elections. And this is understandable because we've been talking about the 2016 presidential elections in the United States of America. The whole fake news or disinformation was actually instrumentalized. Other elections, the fear and threat of interference by foreign bodies. So you could understand the context under which we were operating in the 2019 elections. Lots of fake news were all over there, swirling. We prefer to call it disinformation now and misinformation at the CBD. And they were on different platforms. We had WhatsApp, we had Facebook, we had Twitter. Then we say that it moves either from any of these platforms to the political consultants who go on TV, radio to talk about it, or the Sojojin Baki or who go even on foot, soldiers of mouth, to then spread this into houses in the elections. We actually had different kind of fake news, taking different dimension in the elections. We had the example of the Buhari aide saying that Atiku only avoided arrest during his visit to the US because of diplomatic immunity. Or the opposition official posting news that 800 companies have all of a sudden shut down, even though this story predated Buhari's term. On the wilder end of the scale, there were claims that President Buhari has been replaced by a Sudanese clone, Jibrin. I think that was the most popular fake news in the whole electioneering period. But two things were very important. Aside from the fact that these news were taking off a life of their own, they were spreading, they were on different platforms, but social media provided the cheapest and the quickest way to actually access millions. Through WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, people share propaganda videos, made up posts and fabricated articles. They even made some of it to look as if it was coming from BBC or Al Jazeera. We also had evidence on Twitter of trolls or the use of automaton. So in CDD, in one of our pre-election assessments, we were able to assess over 3.1 million tweets. And from these 3.1 million tweets, we discovered that 19.5%, my colleagues are here, over 19% of it, not up to 20%, showed evidence of automation. evidence of automation itself. And there was, of course, cyberbullying, intimidation, left, right, and center. There was a manipulation of truth, and there was this thin line between satire. Prof was a victim several times of the instrumentalization of either satire, pictures, to give out fake news on the elections, crediting it to him as a former INEC chair itself. We discovered a lot of things from our holistic monitoring of misinformation and disinformation. For instance, we curated some websites which we thought that they were actually spreaders of fake news. And CDD, we often joke, we say, look, I've used my neck. My necks are paining me because I've spent the whole day looking for fake news on Observer Times. I cannot even find again. So, for instance, the Spy Nigeria domain was an example of this because we use a lot of technology to do what we do, graphical, crowd scan, different kind of instruments. We traced the Spy Nigeria, for instance, it was established created in 2015 under the name Punch newspaper. In 2016, it changed to Spy Nigeria newspaper, and now it's now known as Spy Nigeria, under spynigeria.ng. There are around 2 Facebook pages linked to this Spy Nigeria itself, and it has over 100,000 followers linked to other domains. When you take it further again, you find that it has, under Punch Nigeria, which is not the real Punch again, it has over 29,000 followers. So somehow it mutates and it's able to increase. But I think aside from 2 emergent storylines actually persisted during the elections as a whole. And the emergent storylines was that of foreign influence and that of religious colonization, or recolonization, as you may put it. There are several videos coming up telling people that, oh, yes, some set of people are trying to actually recolonize Nigeria. A meeting was held at the Hassel Rock, and this and so was said, or there is actually the Church of Christ. So one was a 55 seconds video, which they called "The Church of Christ in Nigeria is in Danger." It emerged on social media, especially on WhatsApp and Facebook, claiming that the Nigerian government had concluded plans to set up an agency to monitor churches across the country. These videos are well produced, of very high quality. I think the longest video we had during the 2019 elections was 2-minute video, unlike a difference from 2015 where we had around 1 hour 30 minutes to 55 minutes video. So we had between 2 minutes and 55 minutes video. So this well-produced video presented the Kaduna State Governor and President Muhammadu Buhari and cited an unnamed source inside Hassel Rock, Nigeria State House, claiming that the administration of President Buhari had hatched a plot against churches in Nigeria. And this will actually be carried out through the establishment of an agency. It calls on all Christians to protect and defend the church, and it ended with an hashtag VoteWise 2019. In February again, we saw another video emerge. This video, which was also a video on an alleged plan by the government to Islamize the country, was fact-checked and actually proved to be false. This one was spread by the Fulani nationalist movement. They call it the Fulani War. This group is already being fact-checked by CITAD in Kano. That it's actually a faceless group, and it's attempted to actually prevent people from participating in the elections. And at the end of the video, it said something like, circulate to your Christian friends, like that. We had, during the elections, instances of Facebook pages. So we aligned the Facebook pages and the Twitter messages to either they were pro-APC or pro-PDP, and some were in between. Some, for instance, were churning up to 100 messages ahead of the presidential elections per day. They sent out up to 100 messages. But by the time we got to the governorship elections, we had some of these pages barely bringing out 4 news items, and some went completely comatose in the elections. Then also the trend changed from presidential to the governorship and to the supplementary elections held in the 5 or 6 states in itself. So at every point in time, some were anti-establishment, some were very anti-INEC, turning out information that actually creates doubts in terms of the credibility of the election management system, management body itself, INEC. Some also undermined, it also undermines the process. There were instances of contrived violence, but during the supplementary elections, some of the so-called violence were actually genuine. During the distribution of election materials, we had fake news swirling around about election logistics not working well in several areas, and when we reach out to our observers, they were all untruths. By the time it was the time to reveal the results, that results were gradually tripping in, people started bringing up lots and lots of fake results. Such was what the fake news ecosystem looked like in the 2019 elections. But beyond all this work that we were doing, in order to contribute knowledge to the use of WhatsApp in the Nigerian elections, and this time around with factual evidence, because it's actually more difficult because of the rules and everything to curate content from WhatsApp itself. Together with our partners, our colleagues from the University of Birmingham, our own CDD Jamie, we all came together to work on this research as part of our attempt to understand the use of WhatsApp in the Nigerian elections and bring forth as much evidence as possible. And it's also important to note that this platform had uses and obvious misuses, but it was one of the most active platforms utilized by the civil society organizations, the election management body, political parties, citizens, and of course the disinformation peddlers themselves in the 2019 elections. We are happy you have joined us here, and my colleagues will speak on to this research. Thank you.
So this research, and I should say it's been funded by WhatsApp, although aside from giving us the money, they've had no involvement of any kind in the design, management of research, implementation, delineation of findings, and so on and so forth. And the research is looking at how WhatsApp has been used by campaigns and by those in the elections in Nigeria earlier this year, both the national level and the gubernatorial level, looking at Oyo and Kano specifically. So why WhatsApp? Why are we looking at WhatsApp in particular, aside from people that gave us the money to do it, which is a good reason? There are lots of reasons why WhatsApp in particular represents a really interesting and important platform for the sharing of both disinformation, misinformation, and more positive forms of knowledge and information around elections and politics. Apart from anything else, it's the most popular messaging app in Nigeria and in most African countries, in fact. It's also very easy to use. So unlike Facebook or Twitter, where you have to set up a profile, you have to have an email address, all this sort of thing, with WhatsApp all you need to use it is a telephone number. And that means that in particular people who are less used to using technology, perhaps older generations, tend to use it when they don't use things like Facebook and Twitter, and I can certainly say that for my parents. It's also very easy to use in terms of data costs, very low, particularly if you're only using text or images rather than videos. And particularly important for the sharing of information around politics and elections is the end-to-end encryption that's built into WhatsApp. So again, unlike Facebook and Twitter, you can share information on WhatsApp more or less anonymously. No one can look into groups aside from people within the groups themselves. Pay something on Facebook or Twitter, someone might be able to trace that back to you at some point. On WhatsApp, it's end-to-end encrypted, so no one can really see who's been sharing stuff. And indeed, even if you forward something, it doesn't always show the derivation of where that came from, it just says it's forwarded by the person. So that means there's lots of interesting questions raised about what kind of effect WhatsApp has on elections and sharing of information. The project that we have led asks three major questions. So the first question is focused particularly on political campaigns and political strategists and candidates, and is asking how has WhatsApp been used by political candidates and by their teams to tailor political messages in their campaigns, and with what impact does that have? Secondly, looking at the strategies that both political campaigns but also broader communities, kind of political activists who may not be associated with campaigns, NGOs, etc., all kinds of communities, what kind of strategies do they use to disseminate messages via WhatsApp during elections, or approach they take? And then moving to the citizen level, how are voters themselves influenced by these different messages? And to what extent do they distinguish between the sort of fake news or disinformation that Hidayat was talking about and what you might consider more genuine news? There's been lots of discussion in Nigeria, as there have in many other countries around the world, around elections, including my own country, the UK, about the kind of notional influence that fake news has on people during elections. But we don't necessarily have very much information about what people actually do, what people actually think, particularly in real time around elections. And that's something we're trying to do during this research. So we focused, and the research itself took place between primarily January and April this year, initially focused on the presidential election, but moved on to look at two gubernatorial elections, one in the north in Kano and one in the southwest in Oyo. Unfortunately, for financial reasons, mainly we weren't able to undertake a study in the east, although that is something we would have liked to do and indeed would be able to doing if we had further funding. So we're trying to get a sense of not only how these sorts of dynamics play out at the national level, but also at the state level, at the government level. All the dynamics are different, and indeed that's something we found to be the case. What sort of evidence did we use to answer these questions? Well, we had three main forms of evidence. The first was around 50 or so interviews that we undertook with candidates, with their campaign team, kind of strategic advisors around social media, special advisors on social media, political activists, but also those working in the digital space more generally, so NGOs, analysts, scholars, and so forth. And those interviews were undertaken in Abuja, but also in Oyo State and Kano State, to give us a sense of how campaigns are actually using WhatsApp, what approaches do they take, how are they organised, what sort of messages are they sharing, those sorts of questions. But we also, as I say, wanted to get more of a sense of how ordinary people are using WhatsApp and how they're interpreting it, and indeed how popular it actually is. We have a lot of assumptions about everyone is on social media, particularly from the capital city, but that's not necessarily the case, or if we wanted to find out if that was the case. So we undertook 7 focus groups in Oyo and Kano, primarily with urban, more educated actors. We also did a citizen survey, which was what our research assistant teams led on, around 500 in Oyo and around 500 in Kano, speaking to voters themselves about how they engage with WhatsApp in relation to politics, or indeed, they don't use WhatsApp at all. And that was the case with some, but not very many of our respondents. About 91% of those that we surveyed use WhatsApp in different ways. So, before we start talking about the findings that we have and the recommendations, I wanted to just briefly outline the context, both for the national election and the state election. Because one of the things that really comes out of our project is the importance of context and the dynamics at the national and federal level, presidential election, fake news and other stories circulating around that may not be the same stories and discussions that people are having at the state or the local level. We've already heard a lot about the presidential election from Hidayat, and I'm sure that there's nothing that I can say which would be new to you in that regard, so I'm going to move on to talk a little bit more about the state level elections. This was, to remind you, Oyo and Kano looked at. And in both cases, these were elections which were to some extent overshadowed by political godfathers, if you like. In the case of Oyo, a godfather relationship which was seen as being too close. And in the case of Kano, a relationship which was seen by some as being not close enough. So in the case of Oyo, that governor election was overshadowed by the gentleman on the left. He was the then outgoing governor, Ajimobi. He was the APC governor, initially a very popular governor. He was the first in modern history to serve 2 consecutive terms as governor, but he became increasingly unpopular during the second term because of his approach to various governance and dispute issues. So, for example, paying civil servants, some teachers claim not to have been paid for over 12 months. His approach to resolve disputes with university students and university leaders, and tampering with laws, or attempting to tamper with laws around local kinship, ownership hierarchies in Japan. And as well as alienating people in doing that, according to our respondents anyway, he was also seen as handling it in a very brash, dismissive, arrogant manner, which ultimately damaged the candidate of the APC who was seen as being very close to him, Adebayo. So we had that on the one hand, but you also had the emergence of the eventual winner, the PDP candidate, Sei Makinde, who had spent the previous few years building up reputational networks within the PDP network at the state level, and indeed building a larger network in the state through various philanthropic works related to his work in the oil and gas sector. And eventually, as a result of those factors, the PDP candidate, Makinde, won quite dramatically as well. He took 27 out of the 33 LGAs in the state. The story in Kano is similar but also quite different, and relates to the relationship between the then and still current governor Kanduji and his former political godfather Kwankwaso, who were initially again very close, and this was part of the reason why Kanduji came into the governorship in the first place. But during his term, Kanduji sought to sort of distance himself from his godfather, to become his own man, and to take more ownership of the agenda. But in doing so, he alienated those who benefited from former governor and political godfathers' networks and sponsorship and so forth, leading to him losing quite a good deal of support, and indeed leading to Kwankwaso actually suggesting that Kanduji's opponent, Kabir Yusuf, of the PDP, should be the winner of the election. And that, coupled with what you can see on the screen, this video that emerged, which was notionally of the governor accepting a $230,000 bribe from Public Works, leading him to be nicknamed Gam Dollar, and leading to him losing a lot of support, particularly in urban areas. And eventually, after an inconclusive vote and then another vote, he won, but only by 0.46%. So this was a very tight race. And the reason that we're putting those two cases in context is because these are the stories that people were talking about in relation to the election on WhatsApp and other social media during the gubernatorial election. And indeed, in the survey, we tried to test out how salient some of these stories were for some of our people being surveyed. So I'm going to move on now to talk about the key findings of the report. And we have 4 key stables of key findings, which we have organised under 4 headings. The first is organising, the second is context, the third is networks, and the fourth is impact. And I'm going to take you through the first one and then hand over to Jamie for the remaining. So our first set of findings around organising. What we found during our research was that, perhaps unsurprisingly, political organising around WhatsApp has become increasingly important over the last few years, particularly in the aftermath of 2015, where candidates became very aware that WhatsApp and other social media were very important for winning elections or at least defeating their rivals. So what we've seen in relation to this election is much more increased formalisation by the major parties of structures to manage their relationship with voters via WhatsApp. So we saw, for example, both of the main parties setting up institutions which were not explicitly linked to the main party but had close links nonetheless. The Bahari New Media Centre, which was set up in 2017, and the Articulated Youth Course, which was also set up in relation to the election. And these organisations were and are aimed at basically getting a sense and monitoring what's going on in terms of the content being shared around the two political parties and elections and campaigns, not just at the federal level but all the way down to the local level. So the Buhari New Media Centre, for example, has a chapter in each of the 36 states, and then also various networks linked to that through WhatsApp groups in 774 LGAs, most recently. And these are organisations which are staffed by tech-savvy, young entrepreneurial people who know how social media and WhatsApp works and have built different networks and constructed different networks and groups through their own personal networks, through influencers, through social media activists, where they can basically both share information about what the political campaigns are doing and saying, feed that back to the top in order to get a sense of how should it be responded to, but also to monitor what's being said in space. And you're all aware of the size of groups in Nigeria. You can have hundreds of people in particular groups. And so these networks are constructed across lots and lots of different groups to the extent that a particular piece of information can be shared across the whole of Nigeria within 10 minutes if it's sent and forwarded in the right way. But I think one of the things that we'd also like to emphasise in relation to that is that these structures, these political structures, are still very fluid, particularly at the state and the local levels where they are much more organic and put together by political activists who want to access and have a voice in the political campaigns, the governor, for example. So often what we see is not necessarily top-down kind of management and control of messaging, but individuals or groups through their own social networks, through influences, putting together either pro-APC or pro-PDP or whatever groups and through their own social networks, and then building a sort of network of support, and then leveraging that to access the governor or the gubernatorial campaigns and say, I have this many followers who are supportive of the party, I can make them available to you, and often that's with an expectation that they will be rewarded after the campaign with perhaps a job, contract, some other kind. And the particular dynamic I want to emphasise here is what we were told by one campaign aide to the president. In campaigns at the highest level, there is very little digital savvy. So this leaves a lot of space for younger people who are already using it, which is to say they're already using WhatsApp to create political groups, and saying, look, I have this WhatsApp network with a combined number of 10,000 people. Social media is where young people are getting engaged in politics. So it's an interesting dynamic that we've looked into here, which is, to some extent, things like WhatsApp open up space for actors that are not traditionally influential in the political process, younger people in particular, women as well in many cases, to actually leverage some access to the political sphere, which they wouldn't necessarily have. So challenging some of the hierarchies of Nigerian politics. But at the same time, they're also, to some extent, reifying and amplifying patron-client patronage structures by having to offer these networks to a particular candidate, pitching their rival to a particular candidate. So it's an interesting story in terms of organisation of both challenging and amplifying existing political structures.
So I think this is where we want to highlight that, again, why we provided the context is that the specifics are very important. We ran some surveys to ask people if they had seen national level stories. So the one that I spoke about Buhari setting up a centre to monitor churches, but also one about, you may or may not have seen, which CDD also fact-checked and found to be false. And one thing that's really important for us in the kind of content and context, I guess, is around where the information comes from. So, as you know, people are in groups, and groups are a major source of information. And they often become, the definitive kind of way in which people receive information. So this quote, I think, from someone that we spoke to, Guja, talked about how once you get into a certain group, you believe everything you receive in that group is true. So they said that when I receive a message in my church group, I believe it to be true, even though in some instances it is proven not to. And this idea that WhatsApp is quite intimate compared to other social media platforms, that it's coming to you from often, and this is something that came out of our survey, friends and family, they're the two most common people that respondents received information from. It gives an additional kind of weight. Rather than you receiving it from someone you don't know on Facebook and seeing it and saying, oh, I saw this. If maybe your religious figure, your community leader, your parents, or a very good friend of yours who you believe is connected is sharing that information with you, you're more likely to believe it than if not. And one other thing that we also kind of noted in the world of content was the importance of language, and that, again, the variation is quite different. So in Oyo, predominantly, we asked people to tell us what the most common language used is. So it's not to say that people only spoke in this language, but English remained the most common language for people in groups in Oyo. In Kano, about 40% of people were using Hausa for them. And I think that has some implications for when it comes to things like fact-checking and how we're talking about engagement going forward. So to move on to networks, I think the point here is kind of twofold. One is that WhatsApp has not caused a revolution in how politics is done in Nigeria. It's more of an evolution. And just what I mean by that is that what we're seeing on WhatsApp is often a replication of what we're seeing offline. Certain social structures are kind of being rebuilt in a kind of digital space. But with obviously some differences, the fact that you can now share information around very, very quickly, they spread much, much faster than rumors, and that obviously has implications for them countering those rumors. So I think this quote that we have here is kind of reinforcing this. WhatsApp is an amplification of what has already existed. People bring information from nowhere and then it spreads to moving parts and so on. What makes WhatsApp significant is that it is not complex. And this is something that I think is really important, because we hear a lot about, internet penetration rates are low in certain countries, therefore social media is not important. But as we all know, people are often sharing phones, or if you're in a community, someone can read information from a phone, and that can become a kind of piece of information that goes viral in a community and then comes back online. And so there are examples, I think the Jibril from Sudan rumor, some significant kind of Pentecostal pastors were preaching in their sermons that they believed this to be true, having read information online and in newspapers, which was actually a piece of satire that obviously was missed by the pastor. But the way that information spread is really interesting. And this is something that came out really strongly in Oyo research, but the idea that you can't win an electoral campaign in Nigeria just by sitting on WhatsApp and running a social media campaign. You have to go out and be seen, be engaging with communities, be visiting those communities. What WhatsApp is offering is a kind of additional bonus and opportunity to reach out to new groups, to do it much faster, and to do it in a way that can perhaps appeal more to individuals and particularly young people. So, in terms of impact, we also want to kind of stress this point that whilst there are lots of negatives, or not lots, there are negatives around the use of WhatsApp, there are also a lot of positive uses of the platform. And so the danger of what we've seen in some countries where you have internet shutdowns and social media shutdowns is that in doing that, you can lose a whole lot of useful things that WhatsApp and other social media platforms can offer. So during the election, we'd argue that whilst WhatsApp is perhaps the best conduit for the sharing of fake news, it is also the best way of tackling fake news. Because in the same way that information can spread very quickly when it's false, you can also spread that same information through the same networks very quickly. And so during the election, we've seen obviously this 2019 election, we've seen WhatsApp being used by civil society groups to monitor elections, because you can set up groups to have information being related again at the state level, much in the same way that political parties are doing, but for a different purpose. They can also use it for a number of other reasons in terms of doing parallel voter tabulations. There's a huge amount of information that can be shared online, and they can be used as well by electoral commission, but I think they have yet to really fully engage with that. So what we want to say is that there are a lot of opportunities for using WhatsApp in a more positive way in Nigeria. And one thing that came out of our survey is that there is a normative opposition to sharing fake news. So when we ask people, is it ever justified to share fake news? 83% of people said never. So that either says that they're lying to us, which is possibly the case because they don't want to be accused of spreading fake news, or that there is a difficulty in discerning what is false and what is true. And from someone that's been doing some research on this in Sierra Leone and also in Nigeria, there are a lot of things that it's difficult to actually discern, even if you spend a lot of time trying to figure it out. So it's very easy to be a sharer of what I would describe as misinformation rather than disinformation. And I think one last thing about impact that I think is really interesting that came out actually primarily in Kano was the kind of platform that WhatsApp offers women to engage in politics in a more socially conservative space. So we heard from a number of, we had a female-only focus group in Kano, and one thing that respondents talked to us about was that not only is WhatsApp a gender-neutral platform in the sense that you don't need to have any, if you have your picture, it can be anything, your name can be anything, so no one can know whether you're a male or female, so it allows women to be in these groups and engaging in political discussion without necessarily people knowing. And also, they talked about how often in Kano, women are more conservative household, spend time primarily in the house, don't have the chance to go and see political rallies, that they were able to do this all learning about the candidates that were competing through WhatsApp. They were discussing the candidates, who they thought was good, they got to know the face of the candidate, all these things. So it's an interesting kind of space that perhaps could be, again, utilised more effectively. So I think Nick, who's not here, but kind of captures this kind of importance and striking a balance by saying that social media platforms are both a threat to democracy and a way to strengthen it. WhatsApp is being used to spread fake news on one hand and run fact-checking campaigns and election information on the other. So the challenge is to reduce risks without undermining the way that social media can strengthen accountability and promote inclusion. And so how do we do that, I guess? That's the big question. So we have some recommendations for particular this research for both the short term and also for the long term. So I'm going to run through the short term and let Jonathan finish on the longer term. I basically have 4 or 5 short term recommendations. One is really directed towards WhatsApp. And there are a number of things that I think WhatsApp could do to support a more to improve their platform. And some of these have come out of the research and some of the things that they're also already aware of and working on, but to be able not to be automatically added to WhatsApp groups. I'm sure we've all been added to groups that you can't get out of. To be able to leave WhatsApp groups without someone being declared to you that you have left and then getting called back until you have to be re-invited. Also, the opportunity to report content that you receive on WhatsApp that you don't believe is accurate. And then the kind of final thing for WhatsApp is that if they are the biggest, most downloaded platform in 40 of the 54 African countries, and although Facebook has an office in Africa and Facebook is owned by WhatsApp, WhatsApp does not have a presence on the continent. So we would encourage WhatsApp to think seriously about opening an office, and not just opening an office for the sake of having an office, but properly engaging with civil society and other actors to improve things around fact-checking and to listen again. And this is one of the first bits of research that they've really done to look at the platform specifically on the continent. They've done good work in India and Brazil before. The second thing I want to talk about is digital literacy training, and this is also something Jonathan will talk about in the longer term. But for us, the way forward and the way to address the kind of problem of misinformation, disinformation is to improve the average user's understanding of what is fake news and how they can engage better with it. And initially, I think that can be targeted towards community leaders, religious leaders, and also WhatsApp group administrators. So in non-political groups, you often see WhatsApp group administrators running quite a tight ship in terms of not allowing people to share things, making sure that when information is shared it's accurate and justified, and that they can provide a source for it. And I think that this kind of self-censorship, if you like, or better understanding of users can actually be the best way forward in terms of tackling mis and disinformation and accentuating the positives. And then the final short-term recommendation is we've seen a lot of fact-checking initiatives being run during this campaign, and not just in Nigeria, but in other contexts as well. Our research would say that it's very important to focus less on national stories and to focus more on subnational and even local government area stories in languages in which people are engaging and in different